They have combed every aspect of my life for the past 2 years. And so, yes, I'm going to fight and I'm going to prevail like I always do.
Baltimore's voters had their say in June of 2022. They elected Ivan Bates to replace Mosby as state's attorney. Mosby actually finished third in the Democratic primary with less than 29% of the vote. Since then, the case has faced multiple delays, with Mosby's 6 attorneys all bailing on the case, a public defender taking over, and with the racism argument now deemed inadmissible by the judge, Mosby's new counsel doesn't have a great hand to play. So he's now arguing a side travel company was the reason that she suffered COVID hardship, meaning a company that she had on the side. And she was entitled to access to her retirement money early. Okay. On the other hand, she repeatedly distanced herself from that company to avoid conflict of interest questions when she was the chief prosecutor. And it hasn't stopped her allies from continuing to push the argument that she was targeted by the Democratic prosecutors and a Democratic Justice Department because she was too effective in fighting for racial justice. Reverend Kobe Little, the president of the Baltimore chapter of the NAACP, told the Baltimore Sun this week, quote, "If you take any person and subject them to the full weight of the municipal, state, and federal government, I'm sure you could find where they've broken some laws. Ms. Mosby's policies validated the lived experiences of so many black people who'd been subjected to police violence and terrorism." Look, I have no idea what the outcome of the trial will or should be. Okay? I do know that trying to smear a federal prosecutor with hollow claims of racism is dangerous. And these are about as hollow as they get. Joining us now is Jeremy Eldridge, a former Baltimore City prosecutor who served under 2 Democratic state's attorneys there. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, so she was not allowed to make the racism argument. Talk to us about that.
If you're going to make a racism argument, the first thing is you normally make that in the form of a motion to dismiss for selective prosecution. And you have to be able to prove selective prosecution by a legal standard. And the problem here is twofold. Number one is there really isn't any evidence of racial animus by the U.S. Attorney's Office. In fact, in the state of Maryland, overseeing the entire prosecution is Eric Barron, who is the state of Maryland's first African-American U.S. attorney. The second thing that it's important to remember is it was Marilyn Mosby herself in the later months of 2020 going to 2021 that called for the Inspector General, Isabel Cumming, who is a Latina female, called for her to investigate after there was an article by the Baltimore Brew alleging malfeasance with travel, not having been at work for over 200 days in a year-and-a-half period, and expensing things through these travel businesses that were not operational.
Oh, so she actually called for this investigation?
It's a little difficult to blame Goldilocks and the Three Bears for eating your porridge when you invited them inside for breakfast. This is truly a case where Marilyn Mosby went out into the public, invited the Inspector General.
Wow.
The Inspector General did her job, wrote a report, and the U.S. Attorney's Office only filed suit. And frankly, under both the presidency of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And when have they ever agreed on anything, apparently outside of Marilyn Mosby?
Real quick, most people are watching this case expecting a conviction, or does she have a serious defense without getting into all the details?
The difficulty in the first prosecution regarding the CARES Act is that we're really in the infancy of seeing these prosecutions. There's a bit of ambiguity as to what constitutes financial hardship.
Okay.
So if there's an argument, that's where it's to be made. In the second prosecution for mortgage fraud, I think she's got a tough road to hoe, and I think it's going to be nearly impossible to beat that case at trial.
All right, we shall see. Jeremy Eldridge, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.